Durdle Magic. Thank you for tuning in to Durdle Magic. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell if you like the content you see here today, and leave a like and share the video with someone you might think is interested. Leaving those likes really helps us out, but another way to help us out is by using our TCG Player affiliate link below. If you're looking for singles, sealed product, or gaming accessories, please consider using our link to support the channel. We also have some playmats at inkgaming.com. Go ahead and hit the link in the description to check those out. Alright, let's grab some spells and durdle with some magic. Hello and welcome back to Durdle Magic. Today we have the deck tech for Obeka Brute Chronologist. We're going to look at how I made the deck. This is not an extra turns deck, so if you're looking for that kind of deck tech, this isn't the video for you. This is going to focus more on self-mill, reanimation, and some stealing effects, and how we kind of generate value over time using those and abusing Obeka's ability. So let's get into it. So for this deck tech, we will be covering mill and self-mill, graveyard plots, reanimation, brutish invitation, and board control. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead and get to the milling. Mill and self-mill is our first category, and we have some cards that mill our opponents, some cards that mill ourselves, obviously, and then of course we want to reanimate some of those creatures from either place. And we have one infinite combo because I always believe in having a backup, so let's get started. First up is Sir Conrad the Grim. It cares when creatures die, leave the graveyard, or are put into the graveyard from anywhere, and deals 1 damage to all of our opponents. Plus for 1 in black, it mills everyone for a card, so it works out for the deck great. Mindcrank and Duskmantle Guildmage form a classic combo at this point. Mindcrank says whenever an opponent loses life, they put that many cards from their library into their graveyard, and you can activate Duskmantle's first abilities to say whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, this turn, that player loses 1 life. So you just keep going until they're milled out. Altar of Dementia works double duty in this deck, where we can sacrifice creatures we either steal or our own to our own graveyard to mill our opponents or ourselves. So it's just a great include here. Speaking of self-mill, we have some dredge effects and combustible Gearhulk. So what dredge is, it's a replacement effect. Every time you draw a card, instead you may dredge number, put that many cards from your library into your graveyard, and you get the card with that dredge back. So here we have Dockmore Salvage as a land. Golgari Thug also works to help us reanimate some of our guys to the top of the deck, so it's a great include here. And Combustible Gearhulk can provide us some card draw or some mill, and if we get milled, it deals damage equal to the CMC of all the cards to an opponent. They do get to choose, but it's also 6/6 with first strike, and you can reanimate it and have some shenanigans there. So I feel like it's a great addition to the deck. Of course, another good way to get stuff into a graveyard and draw some more cards are wheel effects. Of course, you have to be careful about this Smothering Tithe cough. Mages of the Wheel and Jace's Archivist are really good because they give us the highest amount of cards discarded, or just a straight 7, and of course refills our enemy's hands. Again, Smothering Tithe, a problem there. Wheel of Misfortune and Windfall do similar things to their creature counterparts. Windfall, again, does the greatest numbers discarded. You get to draw those. And then Wheel of Fortune is a little bit iffy, and people can kind of manipulate the outcome, but the card is good enough where I feel like it doesn't take anything away from this deck. And then we have a creature all the way at the top end of the curve, Dragon Mage. If it hits somebody, everybody wheels. And it's kind of good to recur with some haste and stuff. I just kind of like that as a big beater up top, and maybe you can make some deals with people for damage in cards, so I added it into the deck. Of course, with Smothering Tithe and cards like that around, wheels aren't always the best, so let's move on to graveyard plots and manipulate our own graveyard in ways that benefit us more than our opponents, especially if, we run into Smothering Tithe, or Narset, or Hull Breacher, because those are fun. So in order to get things from our hand into the graveyard, we have discarding effects. Faithless Looting, a classic card by now, even banned in one thing or another. We get to draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. It's not random, it is our choice. Plus it has flashback, so we can reuse it again from the graveyard, so it's like 2 cards in one. Chainer Nightmare Adept lets us discard a card, so we can cast a creature card from our graveyard this turn. Only once a turn though, but it also gives any of our non-token creatures we get back from there, which you can't get tokens back anyway from a graveyard, haste, and that includes our commander because as long as it's not cast from our hand, it gets haste. Another addition to the deck I've been pretty fond of is Ormos Archive Keeper from Jumpstart. Less than a buck last I checked, it has flying, it's a 5/5. It has a quasi we don't die condition if we mill ourselves out, but more importantly, for 1 blue, we can discard 3 cards with different names to draw 5 cards. So not only do we get more card draw, we also get things we want to our graveyard to reanimate later. And speaking of more reanimation, Obsessive Stitcher comes to mind. It can tap to draw us a card, then discard one, but then we can pay 2 blue-black, tap, and sacrifice this to return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Straight up. Not tapped, not anything, we just get it. So this is a great include to the deck. We also have ways to get rid of the creatures we have on the battlefield. Viserys here being a classic card at this point, sacrifice a creature, scry 1. Added Kel's Fight Fixer, sack a creature, she becomes indestructible, and we can pay blue or black to draw a card. This is mana, but it works out really well if you want to just get stuff to the graveyard and need a blocker or something else. Kazal's Fury, it's also another land in the deck, but mostly what it's here for is especially if we steal one of our opponent's creatures and they want it back or it's going to get sacrificed anyway, toss it at somebody's face. And then we have Victimize, sacrifice a creature we have, get 2 of them back from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped, but it's a 2-for-1 and it serves all of our purposes. Of course, with creatures coming back into play, we might as well try to remove other creatures and lower the life totals of our opponents. Terror of the Peaks will do that for any other creature that comes into the battlefield under our control, but not itself. It is a 5/4 flyer for 5, so not too shabby. Flare of the Hatebound will only do it for our guys, so that is a little bit more problematic with stealing our opponent's creatures. However, it also has Undying, so it's also hard to get rid of. And a lot like Puppeteer Click, which we'll see later in the video, can be very useful with it just coming back for free. Let's move on to the Reanimation Suite and find out what we can do with our stuff and our opponent's stuff, temporarily or otherwise. To start us off, we have Felden of the Third Path, personal favorite card of mine. For 2 in red, we can basically make a sad robot creature token of a creature in the graveyard, and it gains haste until end of turn. Noticeably, this can give us something back at instant speed and doesn't exile or remove the creature card from our graveyard, so we can essentially make a clone robot of it and then recur that same creature. So there's a lot of utility there with Felden. And then, of course, again, we have Victimize. It's just a great card for the deck, 2-for-1s, especially if you have something powerful in the graveyard. It's fantastic. And then we have Arumi of the Dead Tide. A lot like Felden, in one way, it gets our creatures back and makes tokens. However, it does exile the token if you pay for the Encore cost, which is its CMC, but we also get one per opponent, so there's a bit of a trade-off there, but they both function in the deck really well. Then we have the classic black enchantments Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, and Necromancy, just to bring back anything we want from our graveyard or our opponents. Each one has a bit of a special clause to them. So for Animate Dead, it gets a little bit weaker, but otherwise there's not too much of a downside. Dance of the Dead brings them into play tapped, and they get a little bit stronger with 1/1. You have to pay 1 in black on your upkeep to untap it. Necromancy can be played at instant speed, but then Necromancy dies, therefore the creature dies, and each of these enchantments has that clause. If the enchantment is removed, the creature dies. Other than those cards in the deck, we also have Puppeteer Click and Sepulchral Primordial. Puppeteer Click has Persist, so it will come back if it dies at least once, and it steals something from our opponents for 1 turn and then it gets exiled. We can use Obeka to stop that. Sepulchral Primordial will get something from each of our opponent's graveyards to the battlefield permanently for us, so it's just a really good card, and because they're both creatures and we can reanimate them, it just makes them reusable and abusable. It's time to send out our Brutish Invitation, because why not take other creatures we don't necessarily have from our opponents and allow them to stay a while with our generous hospitality and an Obeka activation. First up, we have Coercive Recruiter, new card from Commander Legends. It steals a creature, gives it haste, untaps it, makes it a pirate, in case that matters. It is also a 4/3, so not terrible for 5 mana. Next, we have Molten Primordial, which comes into play, and we steal 1 creature from each of our opponents. It's a lot like Sepulchral Primordial, and they're from the same cycle, except this one takes things that are alive. It also grants them haste, so pretty good at punching other opponents in the face. Hostage Taker exiles an artifact or a creature when it comes into play, and we may cast it for as long as it's exiled with Hostage Taker. Its trigger ability is also potentially abusable. Zealous Conscripts steals a permanent when it comes into play. Also has haste and is a 3/4, so a little bit weaker than Coercive Recruiter on stats. But it can steal an artifact, it can steal a Planeswalker. It's all turns of the turn, but, you know, Obeka, just one activation and it's ours forever. And of course, because they're all creatures, they're entirely abusable in our deck. And last but not least, we have board control, because some stuff just doesn't want to die, doesn't want to stay dead, doesn't want to stay stealable, and frankly, sometimes there's just too many of those things around to try to do all of that stuff too. So let's take a look at how we're going to defeat the legions of not our stuff. First up, to control the board, we have Mazizian Mortars. 1 in red deals 4 damage to a target, but for overloaded cost, 3 red, we get to basically blow up a board most of the time. Some of our guys even get to survive. Blasphemous Act, classic red removal, probably the best red mass removal in red right now. Usually 1 mana, 13 damage to each creature, and your problems are over. Life's Finale blows up the board, and then you get to go into an opponent's deck and get 3 creature cards from it and put it into the graveyard. So a little bit of selection there, especially if they don't have anything you necessarily want to reanimate just yet. Massacre Girl is a creature. It's a repeatable board wipe in that sense, plus it gets around indestructibility. You'd usually have to have a 1/1 to start things going, but she's a very valuable engine in the deck. Otherwise, we have some quasi-control cards, Rakdos Charm and Echoing Truth. Rakdos Charm has 3 modes on it. The one specifically for here is each creature deals 1 damage to its controller, so if somebody goes super wide, then you can just get them out of your way. Rakdos Charm also has the upside of eliminating a graveyard if you find it problematic, especially versus Spellslinger, which this deck is not well equipped to handle, and it can destroy an artifact if we really need to. Echoing Truth will bounce everything with the same name back to its owner's hand, thereby getting rid of the majority of tokens, and in a pinch it can get rid of a problematic enchantment because we are playing Grixis. And that concludes the deck tech for Obeka Brute Chronologist. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and of course, if you want to check out the deck list, there's a link into the description below. You can let me know what you think about that deck list there in its entirety. Until next time, in the next series, I'll see you around.